Hello, friends. It's the first episode of the Gold and Steel podcast for the 2024 NHL season. We're so thrilled to be back. It's been an amazing off season. The Golden Knights, of course, won the Stanley Cup. But even though it was a shorter off season, it still felt really long. I'm here with my usual co-host and partner in crime, Ian. How you doing, buddy? We're back.
It's nice. It's nice that hockey's back, which is great. It felt, like I say, it has felt quite long in the off season. I don't know why, whether that's just something psychological about the way that it ended. You end on such a high, it then feels like a long lull. Whether that was because free agency was a bit dull. So maybe there was that as well. There wasn't the excitement that we normally see. But puck drop for me the 2 nights ago, and it just feels nice to be able to sit down, put hockey on the telly, and obviously converse with you, my friend, as well. So all good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and what a climax to last season, right? The Golden Knights win the championship, got to lift Lord Stanley. So that's a pretty big contrast. You go into a boring offseason right after that. So that's probably why it felt so dull. Quick summary of what we're going to cover in today's episode, just for our listeners. We're so glad you're all back. And if you're a new listener and this is your first time listening to us, we appreciate you. And we'll just give you a quick run through of what we're going to cover on today's episode. A lot to discuss. We're going to talk a little bit about our plans for 2024, what we're going to do with the show, the Golden Steel podcast and the Golden Steel brand. A couple of quick bits of Vegas Golden Knights news to kick into. And then we have 5 burning questions for this season. Can Vegas repeat? Will be one of those. What are the teams to look out for in 2024 and why? Who's the most improved team going into 2024? What lies in store for the Henderson Silver Knights this year? And who's one player in Henderson who could make the jump? And that may have already happened, hint, hint, but we'll see when we get there. And we have one listener question this week that we're going to address as well. So lots to cover. Let's kick right into it, Ian. Let's start talking hockey. Actually talk about the show just a little bit, plans for 2024. We're going to keep doing our regular episodes, which generally are every 2 weeks. But Ian and I would like to be able to do episodes more often when significant news happens around the team. And so we're changing our tech setup a little bit and setting things up in such a way that Ian and I can produce episodes quickly when something significant happens. And sometimes that might mean Ian is in transition, maybe in the city, or maybe he's on his phone. We did a couple of those last year and they were kind of fun. It may mean I'm on my phone instead, but we feel like it's more important to get the episodes out quickly when those things happen, rather than focus just on the times that Ian and I can both be in our studios. So it'll be fun, Ian, right? It's going to keep us on our toes, I think.
Yeah, it will. Just like you said, it means there'll probably be more episodes of me in London, wandering the streets of London whilst recording the podcast. But it worked well. And the beauty is with technology, the way things are with us, and from your feedback as the listeners as well, we didn't have anybody say, look, the quality was worse, that there was any issues around sound. So, I think it just enabled us to talk about these things quickly, because as listeners as well, when there's something important that happens, you'll look to us to what our thoughts are, and you want to know straight away. And we totally understand that. And that's kind of part of the reason why we're making that change.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be great. And that's us listening to, as Ian mentioned, to your feedback as listeners. And we think that'll be more fun as well. A lot of times when 2 weeks goes by, we put out an episode and some of the information's already out of date by the time we get there. So we'll keep our regular schedule, but occasionally we'll pop in extra episodes as significant things happen. So that's going to be fun. Also, we're planning to possibly throw in some extra content here and there on location at Vegas Golden Knights games, at Henderson Silver Knights games. Obviously, Ian lives in England, so most of the time that's going to be me. I would love it, Ian, by the way, if you could come over here and we could go to some games together. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for that to happen, I'll make some appearances at games and maybe we'll do some special content there for the episodes as well. So that should be fun, right? And Ian, you and I talked about keeping a closer eye on the Silver Knights as well, right? On some of the prospects there and what's going on in the farm system.
Yeah, and I think it's It's a good year for that because we'll talk about this a little later, so I don't want to jump the gun, but it's a big year for Henderson. And we've talked on previous episodes about how the Vegas Golden Knights are structured, how they've become the team, the juggernaut that they are now. But that is going to shift over the next 2 or 3 years, and the importance of bringing youth through, whether undrafted or drafted, is going to be key. So a little bit more focus on that. We're still a Vegas Golden Knights podcast. We don't want to confuse people with that. It's just the ability, especially as you mentioned about things on location, to be able to follow that team a little more closely. And again, this comes from feedback from you guys. We know there's people that watch our show that are avid Henderson Silver Knights followers, so it's a natural linkage between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got some Silver Knights season ticket holders that are followers of the show, and just be fun to keep a closer eye on the prospect pool and some of the players that will no doubt get called up throughout the season. And that's a good segue into a quick little section for VGK news. Obviously, we had the season opener last night. Hockey's officially underway. The Golden Knights beat the Seattle Kraken by a final score of 4-1. Pretty strong start for the team. Of course, they had the Stanley Cup banner raising ceremony, which is also very exciting and a great way to kick things off. I actually thought the team looked pretty good out of the gate. I saw a lot of the qualities that they demonstrated last year. I don't know, Ian, if you got a chance to watch the game, but they were very opportunistic. Took advantage of their opportunities. It was kind of one of those bend but don't break kind of situations, which the Knights have become very good at, because it wasn't that Seattle wasn't generating anything, but they just weren't successful very often. And whenever the Golden Knights got an opportunity to score, a lot of times they made something out of nothing, which is one of the things that made them such a hard team to beat last year, I thought. But did you catch any of the game or the highlights, Ian? Any thoughts on how it went?
Yeah, I did. I watched the game. Lucky, obviously, with me being in the UK, as most of our regular listeners know, but for the people who haven't guessed the accent straight away, I am based in the UK, which means that I have the joys of trying to watch the NHL through, let's say, not easy methods. But I did watch it. I saw the banner raise. Typical Vegas. I loved it. I loved everything about it. I mean, I've loved the stuff that NHL have posted. I watched the video actually back again. They've put a little video on NHL.com where it talks to Bruce Cassidy before that. This may have all been played, by the way, in the arena. I don't know, but they talk to Bruce Cassidy before, shows him turning up, and then it shows the whole kind of banner raise and everything, which with the slot machine and all that, I thought that was a nice touch. Because a lot of teams don't do that. They just kind of raise the banner up and the players stand there and looking like it's a national anthem, and then everyone cheers and it goes on. But I thought Vegas made a nice show of it, as they do well. The game itself, though, as you said, it was almost like we thought maybe there was going to be, and we have conversations in the off season, between the two of us, and we talked about whether there was going to be a Stanley Cup lull, which you see. We saw Colorado have it. We've seen Tampa do it. And I thought Vegas, it would have, and it didn't. They kind of picked up where they left off. So you had Aiden Hill, who was fantastic. And, we're going to talk more about the importance of his contract, because people said, I've seen a few comments where people have said Vegas didn't do much in the offseason. You're like, no, they did. They did some huge things in the offseason, one of which was Aiden Hill. Barbashev looked great. His goal was, that's why you signed a player like him. It's the ability when Vince Dunn is trying to poke check or stick lift him out of being able to shoot. The strength that Barbashev has, his upper body strength to be able to essentially position himself to make that shot, is fantastic. But like you said, Seattle weren't bad. I mean, okay, the Tanev goal, Bob Marshall show goal, I think technically, but Tanev essentially flicked it onto his stick and it rebounded in. Okay, that's a freak goal. That
fluky.
99 times that doesn't happen. But still, I think Vegas showed why they are the team. Because Seattle are not a bad team. They were a good team last year. They've arguably got stronger in some aspects. They've lost a few players, but overall they've become a stronger unit. And for Vegas to make the game look relatively easy, albeit they didn't blow them away, I think is another testament to what we're going to see this season, which is a really strong contender. We talked about, I'll mention this, although we'll probably talk in more depth when we talk about whether they can repeat. But last year, me and you kept saying, why does nobody take Vegas seriously? Well, I think that's totally different now. Everybody takes Vegas seriously. I've seen nothing in the preseason episodes of various of the shows and podcasts that hasn't said that everybody thinks Vegas is a contender. And then you see that against Seattle and you go, that's why. Because they can win. They can win clean. They can win good. They can win dirty. They can. It was good. So it was a great start. It's one game, but it's a good start.
Yeah, one game, right? It's still early. And honestly, the preseason wasn't that impressive from the Golden Knights. You don't read into preseason that much. They're obviously trying out some different things. They've got a new assistant coach. But the preseason, certainly, I wasn't blown away by it until the last couple of games. They had a 3-goal comeback against the Avalanche, which was pretty impressive. But they definitely, now that the points, the games mean something and you're playing for points, they turned it on. And like I said, one game, but a reasonably impressive start. I will say, in other news, I'm not going to say it's concerning, but perhaps a symptom of a shorter off season and a team that hasn't had as much recovery time. The injuries are stacking up already. 2 of them happened in preseason. Alec Martinez is out. He's on injured reserve. Yeah, and is considered, I believe, week to week, or he might be day to day. White Cloud is on long-term injured reserve. He had a wrist injury in the preseason, so he's on LTIR right now. So they've already got 2 of their main defensemen out. And then, of course, in last night's game, it wasn't apparent to me when these things happened, but Carrier was announced as day to day today, and also Howden, and both of those guys are likely to miss the game against the Sharks. So injuries already a problem this early in the season. I'm not going to read too much into that. Sometimes it's just random. Sometimes it happens, but it's not an ideal start to go in already with you'd like to at least have a few games of optimum health, but that's just how it goes. This team is so deep. I'm not terribly concerned, and it's so early in the season. Like I said, it's not like anybody's been announced as missing the whole season or out for the whole season or anything like that, but certainly something to keep an eye on, I'd say, as we move through the season here. Hopefully Carrier and Howden aren't out for long. Hopefully these are minor things. Day to day seems to imply it's a fairly minor injury. So anyway, that's our VGK news. We'll obviously discuss the team more as we move through the episode, but that's kind of our significant news.
One other thing.
Oh, did I miss something?
Before we about Brett Howden, obviously, who's on the injury.
Yes, of course. Let's talk about that.
Because he's been given a 2-game suspension for his hit against Tanev.
Yes.
I didn't think it was malicious. I've seen it back a few times. I've seen the thing on NHL where someone from, I presume, the Department of Player Safety, talks you through the video, which is a bit weird. Tells you why it was a 2-game. I mean, it's interesting, I suppose, but it's just a bit. It clearly hits him in the head. I don't need somebody to tell me whilst I'm watching a video someone hit in the head. Well, you can see here that the contact to the head, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see that. But do I think it was malicious? No. Does Tanev go down a little bit? A little bit. I just think from Brett Howden's perspective, in this game right now, you can't hit like that stood up. Not that straight. He's a relatively tall guy. He's not the biggest guy in the NHL, but he's not a short guy either. If he's going to hit when he stood up against someone that's Tanev's height, you're more than likely going to catch their head. I didn't think Tanev embellished it. I didn't think he made a meal of it, but it just shows that, okay, yes, he's injured anyway, but when you've got other injuries to deal with, you don't want players losing time when it comes to games because of things that are just easily avoidable. So I thought it was a bit of he's not a rookie, but it felt like a rookie error. It's just middle of the ice, pointless hit.
Watching it, I didn't love it. I couldn't watch that hit and cheer him on. It seemed unnecessary. And like you said, perhaps a little reckless. Now it's possible, admittedly, I had a really busy day today. It's possible that I may have misinterpreted the news there on Howden being out. It's possible that was the suspension that I was reading about. And so that's my fault for maybe not fact checking that a little bit more. And I'm sure some of our listeners are going to know the score there. So please forgive me on that one. Like I said, busy day today, didn't get the chance to do quite as much prep on that as I'd hoped. So it's possible that me saying Howden is out day to day is totally incorrect. And that what I was reading, basically I read from one of the Vegas press about Howden missing against the Sharks, and I assumed that it was injury. He was probably talking about the suspension, actually.
Yeah, because it's definitely a 2-game suspension, which will take effect immediately. So it would be the Sharks game, obviously, which is, I think it's tonight for me and tomorrow for you, because of the joy of time difference.
So I'll roll that one back. Let's say that's probably the suspension that I was talking about. Usually I'm a little better on my facts there. So thanks for your patience, guys. Just getting back into the swing of things here. So, all right, great. Thanks for reminding me of that, Ian. Yeah, we did say we were going to cover that. So, and opening night too, right? Like dusting off a little rust still, a little bit pumped up. It's, like I said, and do we know what Tana's status is? Have they announced that?
I believe he's okay. I don't think he's
no concussion
whether he goes
or anything
into
like
concussion
that.
Protocol or anything. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'll be honest. Right. Obviously, I don't follow Seattle that closely anymore. Now that we don't cover our podcast, but
well, hopefully he's all right. But anyway, good start for the Knights. Aside from that, obviously, so. Let's move into our 5 burning questions. This is our 2024 season preview. The first big question, and we've covered a lot about the Knights already, but can Vegas repeat this season? That's really the big question. Do they have it in them to repeat and win another championship? And I'm going to jump in and start here, Ian, and just say they absolutely are a contender again this year. There's no doubt about it. It's essentially the same roster, minus a few pieces, right? The biggest piece being Riley Smith. Of course, we also lost a couple of depth forwards, which was not a surprise. We knew Bluger was probably going to move on. Phil the Thrill, obviously, who I actually think still doesn't have a contract with anybody yet, but he's not a Golden Knight anymore. So a couple of depth players.
That's correct.
Riley Smith, of course, gained Barbashev. I don't think there's any doubt that this team is a contender again. Now, there's some chance involved, right? There's health and there's a lot of things that have to come together. But in terms of the roster, is it stacked enough to win another cup? Absolutely. I can say that without any doubt in my mind. And it's interesting, going back to what you were talking about, Ian, the slot machine and all that. I think there was a little symbolism there. Bill Foley has been quoted as saying that he wants to be a dynasty. And he told William Karlsson when they won last year, hey, there's your first one. But he had told them that he would like to win 3 cups during this window. And you know what? I wouldn't put it past him. Bill Foley's the kind of guy that he says something crazy like that and everybody laughs and then he does it, right? He said
he does. That's
playoffs
true.
in 3, cup in 6. He wants a dynasty, and I think that the slot machine with the 3 cups, I don't think that was an accident. I don't think that was an accident at all. I think that's foreshadowing, and that's what Bill Foley would like to see happen. And it's happened before in the history of the NHL, right? Didn't the Blackhawks win 3 during their dynasty years? And
they did.
Yeah,
as did the Penguins, I believe, albeit they didn't three-peat, but they did obviously repeat.
Yeah, and the Blackhawks didn't either, I don't think, right? Did they win 3 in a row?
The Blackhawks were spread out over, over in terms of window a lot longer, but there was never a repeat, so there were gaps in between all the 3 cups.
Right. But it was during that same window for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, the challenge for Foley and for the Vegas Golden Knights is there's another 31 teams that want the same thing. So,
of course.
it's easier said than done.
Yeah, right.
But I don't doubt his ability to make these things happen, because just look at the team on the ice, and we probably don't talk about this enough, but what Vegas have done since the expansion has never been done before. The only team you can compare them to really is probably the LA Rams from the NFL, and a team that basically said, this whole draft thing, we're not doing that. We're going to build our team for free agency. We're going to build it through trade. We're going to just build to win. And it's worked. So So 3 cups. Wow. Okay, it's a hell of a
right. He said
goal.
he's been quoted as saying that it's a very bold prediction, but I kind of love it. I honestly, everybody
he's
laughed.
That kind of guy, though, isn't he?
Yeah, he is, and everybody laughed at him when he said cup in 3, playoffs in 6, or excuse me, playoffs in 3, cup in 6, and he pulled it off, and actually even exceeded that prediction because obviously they started making the playoffs in season 1. So anyway, I just thought that was an interesting little observation about the 3 cups on the slot machine. Maybe it was an accident, but
in terms of your point around whether they're a contender, I mean, like, it's an easy answer for me of this first question for us, at least 5, and we've eased ourselves in gently, JP, because this is our preseason because we didn't get one. Right. So it is an easy answer to say yes. The 2 biggest things for me, though, in terms of why they're a contender this year, number 1 is the goalie tandem. I mentioned a little earlier in the podcast that I would talk about Aiden Hill. 2 biggest moves that Vegas made in the offseason, and this is going to come as a surprise to anybody, was Hill and Barbashev. Why? Well, Barbashev had already proven that he was a great player. He's a really good playoff guy, and let's be frank, you're going to be in the playoffs this year unless something horrendous goes wrong. But goalie tandem, you've got Logan Thompson, who is now fit, obviously on the bench currently, but he's going to have to earn his place. But we've seen Vegas, of all teams, have done this before, where you have a 1A and a 1B, and I don't think there's any harm in having that. You've got 2 arguably NHL starters that are costing a grand total of $4.7 million combined, which is ridiculous. Ridiculous. The depth that Vegas have got now, I think, is a real strength. I think Henderson Silver Knights has some players that can come up. We're going to talk about them a little later. But there are, and we're seeing that already. You know, we talked about a few on the beginning of the show in terms of players that may come in and drop out, and they'll be filler, of course, currently, and they'll have to earn a spot like everybody else does. But you know, I looked at the line combos that were done on game 1, and I just don't. You know, Chandler Stevenson, a massively underrated player who produces year in, year out, and again scores. I think it may have been the first goal against Seattle, and just proves again why he's the number 2 center. You've still got William Karlsson there, as you mentioned. You've got Paul Cotter, who you would expect to play a bigger role now, not filling in for Riley Smith because I don't think it's his game, but being kind of part of that top 9, which is so strong for Vegas when you compare it to the others. So, yes, they're a contender. Will they win the Stanley Cup again? It's a hard trophy to win. Do I think they're going to make the playoffs? All day long they're going to make the playoffs. Do I think they're going to win the Pacific? I do. I just don't know whether they can win the Stanley Cup, and we'll talk a little bit in a minute about the teams to look out for. I just think there's a lot of good teams. So it's going to be a damn hard trophy to win. But it would be a very strong prediction to bet against Vegas. Bet against the house.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well put. Like you said, a lot has to fall into place, and a lot of great teams. The East is really strong again this year, so there's always a degree of chance. There's some luck involved, right? So it will be interesting to see how the season plays out. I think you're right, though. Playoff team, I'd be shocked if they weren't win the Pacific. Very likely, and then from there, who knows, right? Anything can happen. But let's talk about some of these other teams. So one of our other burning questions is, who are the teams to look out for in 2024 and why? And Ian, I'm going to throw this one to you first. I've got a couple of thoughts there, but I want to hear what you think. Who are we looking out for? Who are the real juggernauts in the league this year?
Yeah, and look, let's start with the West because that's the easiest place to start with. Colorado is the obvious one to pick up on. I feel like they probably had, in their eyes, a bad year last year. They had a slow start.
Yeah,
I did think they did underperform. Now that they still made the playoffs, they were still very strong throughout their regular season. The numbers for people like Makar, McKinnon, Rantanen were still very, very good. But by their own standards, and obviously these are very, very high standards that Colorado set themselves these days, I think they fell short. I would expect them to be stronger this year. They haven't really, there's nothing that looks in terms of their team that stands out as this is the reason why they're going to be stronger. But I think the why for me is because the players they have, And the fact that salary structure wise, they still managed to keep that core together. The hardest thing for them is losing Landeskog. Now, I think the difference between last year and this year is this year they know he's out. They know he's out all season. I know people hate me saying this because the people have commented. I don't think Landeskog will play again. I think the injury is going to be too severe for him to do that. I don't know anything more than what everybody else knows. This isn't an inside track. I've just seen this before with too many players. When it relates to something that's going to affect their skating, it's just hard to. It's too hard to come back. I would put Jonathan Taves in the same boat. I know he said he's taking a year out and he'll come back next year, but I think both him and Landeskog are done. And I think Colorado, because they knew this year they weren't going to have him, like their line combinations, the power play, all these things you can start to, where you are for the whole season. So I'd expect them to be strong. Sticking in the West, I think you've got Dallas. Again, a very, very strong team. And with players that came out of nowhere, whether it be, Rope Hintz, you had Jamie Benn, who had a rebound season last year. Tyler Sagan's now back properly because obviously he came back during last season. They're just, again, there is another scary good team that they're in a central division that is, in my mind, and again, some people may disagree, very polarized. Now, I think you've got some very, very good teams in terms of Colorado. You've got Dallas in there as kind of the teams to beat in that division. And then you've got some not so great teams, which obviously the Blackhawks still fall into, as in my mind, probably do Nashville. So I think Dallas are going to be there or thereabouts. And then I'll talk about Calgary a little more in a minute. But Calgary, I think, are another team to look out. Obviously, Edmonton, you would say, is a team to look out for. My issue with Edmonton is that every year we say they're a team to watch out for, and every year in the playoffs they manage to disappoint. And I just don't know. They're a bit like Toronto. I don't know what they can do to get over that hump. But that's that. And then on the East side, covering this quite quickly, because you could arguably talk about 20 teams here. I think the league has got parity, as we know. I think there's some very, very good teams. But in terms of the East, Tampa Bay obviously are still, a team to watch out for. Vasilevsky is out for a bit, but he's not out for the season or anything. So, he'll be back and they're going to make the playoffs. I don't doubt that for a minute. Boston are another one. Boston are going to be very disappointed in how last season finished, given how they, and the way they lost their playoff series as well is it's going to sting. For sure. That's going to be, and they've had some big changes. Patrice Bergeron, obviously, retiring. It's going to be a big hole to fill. You've now got Brad Marchand as captain. That's going to be interesting to see how that works out. So I never thought I'd see that, but I can understand it. But it's a big thing there. You've got Toronto. You can't discount them. Change in GM, but the same head coach, which surprised me a little bit. I thought Sheldon Keefe may get the boot when and the guy's going, Carl Dubas, went obviously to Pittsburgh. But there's a lot of then kind of middle of the road teams on the East. I would class Florida in that. You've got Pittsburgh, Carolina, another big team in there. So there's a lot of teams to look out for. I think if I was Vegas, the team that I would look out for most is Colorado or Dallas, because that's who I think. It's very early to be doing predictions, but that's who I think that Colorado or Dallas is who Vegas could face in a conference final.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
I agree. I think Colorado and Dallas are the heavy hitters, and I agree with you in the East. Carolina, to me, they've been knocking on the door for quite a while consistently, and sort of strange the way they went out against Florida, but look at what Florida did. Florida just kind of caught fire at the right time, right? And they just kind of were unstoppable. And frankly, if they weren't so banged up, they probably would have given Vegas a tougher series as well. But that health is a big part of it, right? So, but I just feel like Carolina, they've been very close a number of times, kind of consistently over the last few seasons. And so I wouldn't be shocked to see a team like Carolina, make it to the final, and they're definitely a big time contender. And somehow they managed to even get a little bit better on paper, I think, going into this season. So yeah, I would agree with you on all of those. So that segues into a similar topic, but so who do you think is the most improved team going into 2024? So they don't necessarily have to be a contender, or it doesn't necessarily have to be one of the best teams in the league, but who made the biggest leap from where they were last season over the offseason to now? Who made the biggest jump forward in quality as a team, would you say?
So we obviously talked about this prior to clicking record. And I know that everybody that's listening to the podcast and those that are watching it, especially given the jersey that I'm currently wearing, which is the Blackhawks jersey. I think that I'm going to say Chicago here, but I'm actually not. Now, don't get me wrong. Chicago obviously are extremely improved from where they were last season. But in terms of the most improved, and we all know Connor Bedard is the reason for that. There were some other moves that happened. But as somebody who watched the win against Pittsburgh, and obviously they lost against Boston last night, but they're in no way, shape, or form a contender. They're not trying to be a contender. So I don't think they're most improved on that side. The team that I think is most improved, and we had these guys. So when we did our predictions last year, because we spent the entire year taking the mick out of Mike for it, he picked Calgary as the Stanley Cup champion.
Yeah.
Now, Calgary as a team from last season to this season haven't got any worse. Arguably, they've got stronger. But what has changed, obviously, is the back office, including the GM. But they've changed a number of individuals within that organization that are not on the ice. And I don't see them having a season like they had last year. I think there will be this year the team that we were expecting them to be. There's some players that have got to show that, Huberdeau obviously being one, but there is. I think Calgary are a Stanley Cup contender, whereas last season they were dreadful, and that's why for me I think they're the most improved team. Not just because they're a contender, but I think they've not really done anything that makes you look and think, oh, okay, it's because they've acquired this player or that player. I just think in terms of the overall organization, the moves that they've made, I think they're one to watch out for. In terms of the Pacific as well, I mean, I think obviously the division that Vegas are in, Edmonton and Calgary, that's who we expected last season. Obviously, LA snuck in and became a bigger force than we were initially predicting. But I wouldn't be surprised if Calgary don't surprise some people this year.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. And I think they probably underperformed last year, right? I think they did not perform as well as you would have expected them to based on their roster and kind of the skill level on that team. But you mentioned you didn't think it was the Blackhawks. I actually, my pick was the Blackhawks, not because I expect that they're going to be a contender or even a playoff team, but they were just a rock bottom basement team for the last 2-3 seasons at least. And I expect this year, I think they're going to be more of a middle of the pack team, and that's a pretty big jump. Like you mentioned, in addition to getting Connor Bedard, they added a lot of veteran experience to the lineup, which I think will be helpful in getting the most out of the young players that they do have and that they're adding during this and bringing up and developing during this rebuild. They added Corey Perry, who of course is big time NHL veteran, plays with a ton of grit, always manages to get onto these teams that make it to the final or win the cup. He's got playoff pedigree, so his experience I think will be helpful for a roster like that. They obviously added Taylor Hall. We all know how good he is. Yep. And Nick Foligno, another kind of veteran presence who has a ton of NHL experience. So I think that'll be good for a young roster in terms of developing the psychological side of the game, right? And morale and discipline and all the things that a core need to develop. So it feels like a pretty big jump to me, but I agree with you. I don't think the Blackhawks are going to be, certainly not a contender and might not even be a playoff team, but I don't think they're going to be in the basement either this year.
No, definitely not. And I think their season will hinge on a few things. I like what they've done, by the way, just to cover the Blackhawks very quickly. But Peter Mrazek was fantastic in the Pittsburgh game. I don't know his stats in the Boston game, so I've not had a chance to look at them, or even if he played or Soderblom played. Honestly, I don't know. With it being a back-to-back, it could have been Soderblom. But Mrazek was fantastic in the first game against. Now, if he has a really good season, goalies can change games,
That's right.
as we know,
Big time.
and they could become a lot bigger team. But what they've done is they've tried to pair off youth and experience. I won't say young and old, but youth and experience, right? Because if you look at the D-core now, there's players. I mean, Kevin Kuczynski looks the real deal. I mean, okay, the Blackhawks made a lot of waves because they traded essentially to get him. And they traded away a lot to get that pick, which the fans at the time did not like. But seeing him on the ice, and this is a kid that is like, I don't know, he's like 100 foot tall, but he can, and he is like, he's paired off. I was trying to remember who he was paired with, but I remember saying to my wife, we were watching at the time, and I said, the guy he's paired with is actually like 6 foot something, and he makes this guy look tiny because Kuczynski's so tall.
Just a giant.
He's got really, he's just a giant of a guy. He's 7 foot something, or anyway, he looks like, Andre the Giant style, but he is got really soft hands. Like he's got really his passing ability, his movement with a puck. He's a very skilled defenseman for a big guy, which is, I don't want to typecast defenseman here, but normally that's not what you would expect from a 7 foot juggernaut of a player. But the fact they've paired each of those young D, because there's Alex Vlasic in there as well. What I think it's what Kaiser's the one. They're paired off each of them with people like Tenordi, with Murphy, so that they've got this kind of mixture. And it's the same with Bedard. I mean, Bedard looks the real deal. Everybody kind of knew he was. I'm glad he scored last night because, again, one of the conversations that I'd had in the offseason was, can the media just give this kid a break? He's 18. Like, if he has a bit of a naff season this year, that doesn't mean he's not a generational talent. It just means he's 18 years old.
It means he's new.
He's eight, and he's not a big. He isn't a big. The one thing that's surprising with him is he isn't actually that big a guy. Mm-hmm. He's not weak by any stretch of the imagination. He's a strong guy, but he's only 5 foot. I think it's 10 or 11, which in hockey player standards is short, quite small. Yeah, for our generation standards. JP, that's average height, but it's quite short for a hockey player.
Short for hockey players,
yeah. But his puck skill is fantastic. But having people like Taylor Hall, and that I think was a really good move. But why they've done all of this, and this is the one thing I haven't seen people talking about. This makes perfect sense from a GM perspective because they're not going to be a playoff team, which means when it comes around to deadline day, and they're looking to shift off players and get some draft picks in, don't be surprised if people like Foligno, Perry, not Hall, but some of the players that are only on 1-year deals don't get shifted for draft picks because they're great playoff additions. So who wouldn't want a Nick Foligno if you're a playoff team?
Very true.
Just as a locker room guy, if nothing else, right? Same with Corey Perry. So I think for the Blackhawks, the additions they made make sense for numerous reasons. So I could totally understand why you chose them, mate.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. I didn't think about that. And guys like that in this stage of their career are generally playing year to year, right? And you're right. There's a ton of playoff teams that would gladly add those guys to their rosters for sure. And Corey Perry, the not just the skill, but the grit, right? Like he plays with an edge for sure. And that's a great addition going into playoffs. My gosh, he's been on 2 or 3 different teams that have made it to Western Conference or conference finals or Stanley Cup finals or won over the last 4 or 5 years. So that guy probably has more playoff experience in the last few years than any player in the league. Somehow he just managed to wind up on all these rosters, these teams that go on these deep runs. But anyway, it'll be interesting to see what goes on with the Blackhawks this year. So shifting back to the Golden Knights camp, let's talk a little bit about the Silver Knights, particularly in Henderson. What player do we think could make the jump to the Golden Knights roster? And that may have already happened, but Ian, I'm going to throw this one to you. What do you think with that question? Who's going to make the jump this year? So
I think you're right. There obviously has already been some movement already. And I think it would be harsh to have him as the guy, Dorofeyev, obviously, who we're talking about, as the guy who was going to make the leap. Because I kind of feel like he made that leap already. I just think his problem is...
He kind of did, didn't he? Last year, he kind of did.
And I think he was he was impactful last year. We were talking about him in some of our episodes, saying like, this kid looks like he can do it. He looks like he's a top 9 NHL forward. So I think I would discount him from this conversation currently, but Brendan Brisson obviously is one of the players that people will be looking for. I think his problem is he didn't have the greatest of seasons last season. And again, some of that comes down to expectations. I'm not saying he's had a bad season. I still think he's a top 6 forward as a potential, but he hasn't got the same sort of trajectory that we see for all first round picks. And all first round picks are, created equal, unequal, should I say? Because some kids take years and then they just like burst out. And I think Brisson could be like that. So I think he'll need another season in Henderson, adding a bit more to his game, scoring a bit more points. I know that's not all of his game that it is, but it would be good to see that. But the guy that's interesting is a guy called Gage Quinney. Okay, sure. So this is a guy, so Vegas native, so obviously the fans will already love him. He's been injury prone. This is an undrafted addition to Henderson. So this isn't somebody that came through the NHL draft. This is somebody that joined in the NHL. I mean, his career, I won't bore everybody with his career now, but I would recommend if you go on to Cap Friendly and look at this is somebody who's worked his backside off to get where he is now, let alone if he makes it to the NHL. But he's put up some serious numbers. I'm actually just gonna, if I can find where his thing is I pulled up earlier. So his stats for last season is he played 66 games in the 2022-23 season for Henderson. He scored 64 points. Which is okay. Yes, this is the AHL, but that's still pretty impressive when you compare that to Brendan Brisson, who was nowhere near that. And then the year previous, okay, injury prone because he only played 38 games, but he scored 23 points. Chicago Wolves, obviously before the Silver Knights existed, 46 games played, 36 points. First season of the Henderson Silver Knights, which was the 2020-2021 season, he scored 17 points in 19 games. His problem is staying fit. But last season he played 66 games, which is more than he's done the seasons before. If he can stay fit, I don't see any reason why, if there was gaps in Vegas, you wouldn't look to give him a shot. But he could be a surprise call-up. So that's who I'm going to go with, because I love a story like this. And if he was to make it to the NHL, even if he just becomes a bottom 6 forward, for the rest of his career, what a story that would be. And to have somebody on the team that's actually it's a Vegas native that hasn't been drafted, that's actually worked his way through, I think it's a great story for that. So he's my outside shot.
Yeah, that is, it would be a really fun story. And I will say, having obviously watched the Golden Knights very closely in recent years, he's had a handful of call-ups. He's obviously high enough on the depth chart that he's definitely on their mind, right? The front office has their eye on him. He's not always the first call up. And of course that depends too, right? Sometimes it depends not only on how they're playing, but also on who's out of the lineup.
Correct.
So depending on what spot they feel they need to fill, it's not always the same guy getting called up, right? It's not as simple. I think it's important to remember that it's not always as simple as, well, that's the first call up, right? There's sometimes 3 or 4 guys, and one of them will get called up just depending on the scenario or the context. But Quinney's been called up a handful of times and has done reasonably well when it's been called up. So I think that's a good call. And you're right, Brisson is kind of the first one that comes to mind. Like you said, he's on paper, he's sexier in that way, right? Because he was a first rounder and he had some good moments in the preseason. But yeah, like you said, maybe still a little bit of youth there. And honestly, if I were a pro hockey player, it would be really exciting to be part of the Golden Knights organization. But if you're a minor leaguer, it would also be really frustrating because this roster is so stacked. We've talked about this before. There's just no room. There's no space. No. Look, Max Comtois, this is another little bit of news that we didn't cover earlier, was given a professional tryout by the Golden Knights and did not make the squad. They released him from his professional tryout, and it's not because it's not that he's not good enough. He may get a contract somewhere else, but on this roster, he would have had to have been exceptional during camp to bump somebody. I mean, basically he would have had to have bumped bumped Dorofeyev probably from his spot, or possibly Paul Cotter, which I think was even less likely. So that's what you're up against if you're a minor leaguer in this organization, or if you're an up-and-coming prospect. So it's tough. But like you said, with injuries and stuff, these guys get a chance to show their stuff. And Dorofeyev obviously did that last year. But it's very hard right now. And Brisson, if you were in another organization, I think he could feasibly be playing in the NHL already. But and a guy like Quinny as well. So it'll be interesting to see. But Quinny's a great one to keep your eye on for sure. That's a good call there, Ian. Well, I'm looking at the clock, and we're getting deep into the episode here. So in the interest of time, let's move on to our last point. We had a listener question this week, and I love it. Rita, who's one of our regular listeners, has been a longtime supporter of the show and is always very spirited and always has great opinions and thoughts on the team. Popped in an early listener question before we even got started, which we love. And I'm going to read her question word for word here. I say Jack wins the Selke this year. She, of course, is talking about Jack Eichel. She says, I say Jack wins the Selke this year. What do you say? Good topic if you hit a lull in the broadcast. You could try to explain why this might not happen. It'd be wrong, though. I love it.
The fact she set the stall out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Whatever you say, guys, unless it's saying, I agree with you, Rita, you are all wrong.
But that's what I love about Rita. She has strong and firm opinions, and it's always fun to have hockey conversations with her, whether they be debates or she is a diehard Golden Knights supporter, and I absolutely love her for that.
She is.
But Ian, I'm gonna throw that one to you, man. I have one interesting point I'd like to throw in, but you start, and then I'll throw in a little extra info.
I won't steal your point because obviously I know what it is. But the Selke Trophy, just for those the new listeners that maybe aren't aware of what the trophy is, this is for the forward that shows the most defensive competencies, I think is the official line that they use. So it's your defensive forward. And if you go through the years who's won it, you've got people like Pavel Datsyuk, Jonathan Taves, Ryan O'Reilly, Patrice Bergeron a ton of times, and players like that. So you're looking for a forward who maybe not be the biggest point scorer, although they're not interchangeable. You don't have to not score points, but it is around the defensive element of the game. Now, winning it this year is slightly easier than it would have been last year because Patrice Bergeron retired, so he's gone. So he's not in the league. But there are quite a few players that I would say are in the mix for the Selke. You've got players like Ryan O'Reilly, and I would have him as my favourite. Sorry, Rita, and I know I'm wrong because you've told me already. But the reality is, I think Ryan O'Reilly on Nashville is with a better team arguably than where he was last season. Although there's some for debate. You notice that we didn't mention the St. Louis Blues when we were talking about teams to look out for. Neither did I mention Nashville, so you could argue that they're both in similar positions. But the reality still is that Ryan O'Reilly is a hell of a defensive player. Face-offs tend to come into this a lot. Again, I don't want to put down, but face-offs tend to come into it. Now, in terms of face-off percentage, can I get that off the stats here? No, I cannot. But what I can get for the stats is that Eichel's stats last year, his plus-minus was 26, which is good. It's not great. But if he's going to win it, so if we'll stay positive, and if he's going to win it, he's going to have to be absolutely hot on the draw. So his face-off percentage is going to have to be very good. His plus-minus needs to be good. Whether people hold a lot of stock in that, it doesn't matter. It's seen as a defensive statistic, so it will matter. And it's what situations he's in, without giving away the bit you were about to say, JP. But so I think he's got some really stiff competition for this. But without Bergeron, without obviously Jonathan Taves, if he was going to win it, there's a good argument to say why not this year. If he doesn't win it, though, does it matter? I don't know. I think if they win another Stanley Cup, no one's going to care. But it would be nice for, after all the stuff that Eichel's had, for him to get some individual awards now. Yeah. To kind of show everybody that he is that superstar talent, which anybody who watches the Golden Knights already knows.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
That's my piece, mate.
Yeah, it'd be nice, a little bit of vindication for him, as if the Stanley Cup wasn't enough. But right, individual vindication for a lot of the crap that poor guy has taken, especially from the fans in Buffalo. So it would be nice. And obviously, he was. Most people would agree the Conn Smythe runner-up, right? He was right in the mix up until the last minute, and probably came in just a very close second behind Marchessault, who did win the Conn Smythe last year. But and I wanted to throw in just one more quick little point there, Rita. It is interesting that you bring that up, Rita, because Jack Eichel is on one of the penalty kill units this year, which is a really interesting development. I know he's a two-way player, but it's interesting that he's now on a penalty kill unit, which he was not last year. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if he's ever been a penalty kill guy in the NHL. I don't know enough about his history with Buffalo to say that for sure, but I would say that may not be what he's known for. But obviously that speaks to Cassidy's belief in Eichel's defensive ability for him to be on a penalty kill unit. But it's kind of an interesting development, right, Ian?
So I think what's happened here is that Rita has clearly spoken to Bruce Cassidy, told her her prediction over the Selke, and he's gone, you know what? Well, you clearly told me if I don't agree, I'm wrong, and therefore he's going to play in a penalty kill. Because you're right, normally he wouldn't. Yeah. Because it's ice time that you don't need a player who is such a prolific player on the power play. Normally, you don't want them then to be on both special teams because it's just more ice time, it's more minutes.
Right.
But part of this could be because Vegas are so stacked is they don't need to, like, one of the differences between Cassidy and what we've seen with other head coaches in the Vegas system over the years is you don't need to continuously keep running out the first line over and over and then playing 24 minutes where everybody else plays 10. So that freedom, I suppose, probably gives him the ability to play on a penalty. If he's on a penalty kill line, obviously I didn't want to mention it before you did, JP. Does that matter in terms of the Selke conversation? 100%. 100% it matters because it all goes down to more draws in terms of face-offs, goes down all those statistics that could take into account. And remember that, like anything, these things are voted on by people. It's not, there are a few trophies where it is top goal scorer, most assists, blah, 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 all those ones. Ones when you get to like Selke and some of the others, it's a bit like MVP, really. There's always an argument for MVP of, is it the fan's choice? Is it the player's choice? Or is it the popular choice? And that's when it comes to things like Selke, there is a little bit of, unless someone's going to tell me I'm completely wrong here, but I don't believe it's statistically worked out. There are statistics that go behind it, but it's essentially people vote on 5 individuals that make it into or 3 or whatever, that make it into the voting pool. So Jack, why not? Why not Jack Eichel? Yeah.
Right. There's some bias there, some possible bias, and it's all going to be human judgment, obviously. So, right, it's not just based on a good number or stat, but it's a fun thought, and it did, Rita, the question did bring to mind that Eichel is playing on a penalty kill unit, which I thought was actually kind of a fascinating development. But it does, Ian, I think, kind of like what you said, Ian, it speaks to the team's systems and the way the roster is constructed and the way the roster is played, right? Which is very much kind of the polar opposite to a team like the Edmonton Oilers, who leans so heavily on their top 2 lines, which is, right, some teams are built that way, but
teams do that,
but the Golden Knights are not constructed that way, and that's certainly not how they play. So thanks for that question, Rita. We always appreciate you, and it's always fun to chat hockey with you. Like I said, long-standing listener and supporter of the show, and Twitter buddy, or should I say X now? We know it's not called Twitter anymore. It's going to take me a while to get used to this, so if I say Twitter, you know what I'm talking about.
Then we have to call them X buddies, which just sounds like
it does. It changes our entire vocabulary. I didn't even think about that. What are we going to call them now? I don't want to call them X buddies. Yeah, that's weird. It's sort of
buddies on X.
It has other implications, doesn't it? So we'll have to ponder that one, and maybe we'll come up with something by the next episode. But folks, it's amazing to be back. We're so thrilled that hockey is back, as I know you are, and we're thrilled to be back on the air, talking about hockey, interacting with you guys. And for all of you who are back listening, welcome back. Good to see all of you. We got a little quiet in the off season. I mostly just retweeted, or should I say repost, re-X'd during the off season to give myself a little bit of a break as well, but we'll be back to being active. And if you have any questions or any thoughts you'd like to share with us or things you'd like us to discuss on the show, don't hesitate to share those things with us on our Twitter/X profile or at the website. You can use our mailbag feature and submit questions or thoughts there. And the website is goldandsteel.vegas. So please visit us on the web. Thanks again, folks. Enjoyed chatting hockey with you this time around. We'll see you in a couple weeks or maybe sooner. Signing off. Take care. Bye-bye.